was either. So it's like the place I miss.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the panelists here. I've heard from people just walking around that I think this day has been meaningful to a number of us, and that's great feedback to hear. So we're gonna spend another hour talking about democracy in our community. I think this is a kind of special panel where we're trying to put the conversation about our local politics and civic life in conversation with some of our national politics, which is something we've kind of avoided today in general. And we have some speakers here who I think can speak to some of the local forms of democratic participation that we've been talking about, as well as how they intersect with the national scene. I'd like to start, if it's okay, with just asking panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their work. Pastor McNeal.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Patrick McNeal. I'm representing the UM-Flint Neighborhood Action Council. If I was just to share a little bit about myself, I am born and raised in Flint, Michigan. I love my city. And for those of you who went to the correct high school, I went to the best high school ever created under God's green earth, Flint Northwestern High School. I just want to let y'all know that, right? I had to make sure that those who know that everybody else should have been a Wildcat.
Don't worry, I get to speak too. Don't forget, I get to speak too.
I'm starting to get the feeling that I'm between two rivals here.
Oh, yeah.
It's Wildcats and
Vikings.
Vikings! Hi there. I'm Jenna Bednar. I'm a professor of political science and public policy at one of the other U of M's. But I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you all today. One of the things that I do in Ann Arbor is I run UMish Votes, which is our campus voting infrastructure. And on this, I'm just going to say you all completely trounced us in 2022. While I love this. Okay, 3 out of the 10 highest levels of student voting in the 2022 election were the 3 U of M campuses. But number 1, and I hope you all know this, but I'm just going to say it, was you all. Number 1. And that's spectacular. And then one of the other hats that I run is that I am co-chair and faculty director of an initiative on democracy and civic empowerment on campus. So it's basically creating a hub for all things related to democracy across the entire campus, not just law and political science and public policy. Anyway, that's me.
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Dan Kildee, and I am the president, CEO of the Community Foundation of Greater Flint. I started that job in January. I'll talk a little bit more about some of that work as we get into the conversation. I'm a Flint kid. I am a graduate of Flint Northern High School. Which really, I'm proud of that. But really, Pat, you should be proud too. Because you have done so well to overcome the fact that you were not given the opportunity to go to Northern High School. And I'm proud of you for all you've been able to accomplish and overcome that. That lack of opportunity not to be a Viking, and it's great that you're doing so well. So thank you for that. It is a rivalry, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
Look, I'm doing the work at the Community Foundation, but I come to that after a really long period of time working in different forms of public service. Originally as a social worker, but the last 12 years before I came here, I was a member of the United States Congress representing this area, Flint, Saginaw, Bay City, Midland, and then for a while all the way up to Tawas. But I was in local government for a really long time before that. And I think my greatest lessons about the subject of tonight's conversation come from my time in local government, 25 years in county government. I was elected to the Board of Education in Flint when I was 18 years old. So I started my public service career, more than a decade ago. When I was 18. We'll talk more about that too.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I am Kenneth Frierson. I am a Flint kid.
Tell it.
I am a Flint Community Schools graduate. And I graduated from the prestigious high school in Flint. We don't tend to get into the back and forth. We tend to stay just above the fray. Some of the highest academic programs, sports teams depending on the decade, band, etc. The list goes on. But that's Flint Southwestern Academy. So I see some Knights and some Colts in the building.
My wife went to Southwestern, so I gotta.
Honorable mention to Dan's wife, who went to Southwestern. Right. Honorable mention to my mother, who went to Northern.
Now that makes sense.
We've got a coalition for it.
So I am a program officer at the Ruth Mott Foundation.
That's what it takes.
And I have been at the foundation for about 5 years after spending over a decade in education. I'm really at every level. K-12 teacher for a couple of years, directed many programs on undergraduate campuses, and before pivoting into philanthropy, I ran enrollment management for a graduate school. So really had an opportunity to work through the education system and spent a lot of that time making sure that I was helping students in the student success strategies, student success initiatives, as well as engaging them in citizenship efforts. At the foundation, as a program officer, I work across all 4 of our priority areas, work very closely with the community, and have the honor of leading our civic engagement work at the foundation. And that will likely be the lens that I speak most from tonight.
Thank you. I think I'm feeling grateful that I grew up in Philadelphia and went to high school there. This question is for Kenneth and Pastor McNeal. Flint has become a symbol of crisis, but also resilience and resident determination. What are some ways that Flint communities are building democratic and civic power in the face of distrust toward governing institutions? This is a long one. What lessons have your experiences in North Flint provided for thinking about civic participation or local organizing? And finally, if you have time, are there lessons for our national politics to think about from our community here in Flint?
First and foremost, I want to start off this way. There are layers to these questions that I was just posed, and I want to try to unpack them in a way that really speaks to what it feels like to having lived through and still living in some of the things that have happened to us. You see, the residents of Flint have had wounds that were under the surface already. And sometimes when you hurt, it takes something else to show you that you really have been hurt. And so we have been hurt, y'all. And while I have no problem with being resilient, I prefer not to get hurt in the first place. And that's my hope for my community. We didn't do anything to deserve to be hurt. We have always been a hard-working city. We love our high schools because we lived in our neighborhoods and we went to the school in our neighborhood in spite of what others did. It may not have been the best for somebody else, but Northwestern was the best place for me to be. And so when we begin to talk about this idea of democracy, first we have to realize, has democracy ever came for us? And how did that look like? And so you have to forgive people if they take a little look towards government at all levels, local, state and federal, because we were failed by everyone. I'm gonna just say that one more time, y'all, so I can make sure we clear. We were failed. We didn't do anything. Even when we tried to tell people that the water was brown, because we had a bottle like this, and what color was the water in it? It might have been orange, but maybe it was brown. But depends on how you look at it, it was still bad. It smelled. We had lesions on our body. And yet people want us to just forget about it. It ain't that easy when you've been hurt and you're still trying to work through your trauma. So first and foremost, to everybody who was in Flint and who's still here, thank you. I appreciate y'all. Now to talk about this democracy thing, right? So I'm a firm believer in this, that you gotta participate in democracy. Even though all these people failed us, we can't take our ball and go home. Because if we do, we will be failed again and again and again. It will take us in our participatory mode to do what needs to be done. And I'm watching people do it. It may take small steps. It may take us a while to get there, but I'm watching people do it. Organizations that are in this room, organizations who have already spoken. I don't ever want to forget to think that I am the only one. I know I'm not, and I'm happy that the North Flint NAC doesn't have to be, because there are other organizations around this community who are doing this work. We just happen to be doing it too. So we do a lot of work on civic engagement. We partner with the City of Flint and the Community Foundation to start the City of Flint Civic Youth and Adult Leadership Academy. Why? Because we need to have an educated electorate so that we understand who you vote for doesn't bother me. I trust you. Just know why you voting for who you voting for. Not by the tidbits that's on TV, not by the slick ads, or not by somebody who made you mad. It's literally do your research, do your due diligence, and know your why. So that's where we're trying to get to, is help people to know their why. And again, if I trust the people of Flint, let me just say that one more time, y'all. I trust y'all. I may not agree with y'all, but that's okay. Agreement and trust are two different things. If you have a family and you tell me you ain't never argued with me, I don't trust you. So there's something there. So we begin to see that. We just came back from Seattle, where we took a group of black men, blue-collar black men, to Seattle to learn about Citizens University. Why? Because they need to be civically engaged, because they are the most apathetic voter in here, because they can't see anything that benefited them from the process. But yet, we still have to participate. So our role in doing this work is we are resident-led, we are resident-driven. The word that we say is nothing about us without us. I lead from the middle or lead from behind. They take all the pictures, I do the work. And we have a great understanding with that. And so I would just simply say that community has to be centered in whatever else comes out of Flint. People have tried to work around community for too long. Now it's time to work with community. The people who are closest to the problem are closest to the change. But you have to begin to trust what I've grown up with. My father used to say these adages all the time, but the one that comes to my mind right now is, in the absence of truth, people make it up. It's time for leaders, community organizations, politicians, philanthropy, to quit making things up about community don't care. No, they care. They just want to know that their concern ends with a result, not just a conversation.
This is not the first time that I have been around the table with Patrick, nor is it the first time that I've had to follow behind Patrick. So I am develop this muscle. I'm developing this muscle each time because it is tough. So as it relates to the national landscape and national politics, I definitely think it goes without, saying really, is that there are definitely lessons that our national politics, I think, could learn from the Flint experience. And a lot of some of what Patrick talked about, even with the resiliency, I believe it was at our opening session, I believe it was our clerk, Kurt Cummins, who said it's like resiliency being the byproduct of the experiences that we have had in this community. And so one of the things that I would highlight and what our national politics could learn is the idea of partnership. And so with the work that the Northland is doing, Northland Neighborhood Action Council, I'm going to just call its full name, what they are doing and like what so many others are doing, working with community organizations is important to the Root Foundation. So even as folks are great seekers, we are always asking the questions, who are you working with? Who are you working with? Who are you partnering with in the community? Has the community asked for this? Just because you think it is a good thing or it is the right thing, just because we think it is a good thing or the right thing, we want to know that the community has asked for this that you are proposing for the community. And our approach is with the shoe leather philanthropy type style, which is we want to work with, listen to, learn from community in our engagement. Each time that we're meeting with folks, we begin our North Flint strategy. That is the folks of the Remote Foundation over 10 years ago. And we did that by listening to community. We hosted a number of listening sessions, engaging hundreds of residents. And then we concluded and focused based off the information that they gave us. And so philanthropy, just like other fields, doesn't always get it all right. I don't think that we get it all right. I do think that the Root Foundation is very committed to having that community-centered approach to how we engage with folks. So we recently just refreshed our mission, our vision and values at the foundation. And what did we do? We went back to community. To get more feedback. We are updating our strategic plan. And in getting this information, we included a community engagement committee made up of the residents from around the city. And we said, we want to go back. It's not we're just going to come in. We want to go in and we want you to help us decide how we go into the community, what we should be saying, what we should be looking for. And we want you to help us design the sessions. We don't want you to be bored. We don't want you to, be uninterested. We want you to help us design the sessions as well. And so we actually just wrapped up a lot of that. But for us, it is really about how do we get folks and organizations in the community to partner together? How do we partner with them in the work? And the idea is really for collective action. I believe that it was Miss Bridget with North Flint Market that talked about the African proverb of Ujima, right? So it is the meaning of collective work and responsibility. And I think that is where our focus is. I think there were certainly layers in the question, but I wanted to just really extract that point on one thing that's important to us being around partnership. I do think that the national landscape could look to Flint and learn, because I do think that is one of the things that we do well. And doing well doesn't mean we do it perfectly, but it is one of the things that we do well.
I want to rinse off of that a little bit. This question, I think, is for Congressman Kildee and Professor Bednar, but really for any of our panelists. Just to go back to this national level, we obviously see a lot of democratic backsliding, both here and internationally. In what ways is the action at the local level, as far as making important, even structural changes. Is that possible to do focusing on our local community? What are the pros of doing so, and what are the impediments to doing so?
All right, they're going to let the lady go first. Yeah, this is such a good and important question at a time, I think, when you said that nobody's really brought up the national landscape today, and I whispered to the congressman, maybe this, mental health preservation. Yeah, we're, as a political scientist, we're very, very concerned globally with what we call, in this nerdy way, democratic backsliding, but just this, every measure that we have of democracy's performance globally is declining. Of course, you have some instances where that's not true, but somewhat shockingly to Americans, it's really declining in the US, like in this measurable way over the last 10 years. But as a scholar of federalism, I'm kind of excited because it's got some people in the US saying, well, what about the local though? Like, is that always terrible? So one of the things that happens on our campus is we have a Center for Local, State, and Urban Politics, and they annually survey Michigan elected officials and across the entire state. We're the only survey of local officials on a statewide basis in the country, and this has been going on for a long time. And one of the things they ask about is, what do you think is the state of the health of democracy within your community? And I just got the most recent results. So this is people who were surveyed in 2024. And I'll actually read you the question because I had to get back to our scientists on this because I was a little bit worried about one of the findings. Okay, so they say, what they ask is, they prompt the official. What do we mean when we say democratic health? Think about things like free and fair elections, rule of law, an unbiased free press, balanced relationships between levels and branches of government, ethical and transparent governance, an informed and engaged electorate, etc. On a scale from 1 to 10, where 1 is total breakdown of democracy and 10 is perfectly functioning, how would you rate it? Anyway, the rating by our elected officials of democracy statewide is the highest that it's been since before COVID, which is quite interesting, right? So COVID was a big shock, and especially in the state of Michigan, a lot of confusion about what policy ought to be, real decline in trust, and because of the decline in trust, a real decline in a sense of confidence in democracy. A lot of other reasons possibly, to be worried about that. One thing, though, that they did find that these local officials were reporting is lower citizen engagement. And so I said, how are you squaring democracy is perfectly healthy and people aren't engaging as much? And so this, I think, is, clearly a point that we want to have much more conversation about. We probably will at this panel. This room is, fired up and ready to go, clearly. But we need to be thinking about citizen engagement with this.
I'd really like to read that study, and I want to make sure I understand. Was the survey of local public officials?
Yes, they're filling it out.
Yeah, well, I would say this. If you survey local public officials, they would say they're doing pretty well, right? Some of them, right?
But still with the variance is
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
I guess to answer the question, sort of connecting the national environment with what's happening across the country and locally, I think one of the interesting observations that anybody would have coming from this community and looking at what's happening at our national government is that we don't have to wonder about the consequences of the loss of democracy. We experienced it. The Flint water crisis wasn't really just about Flint, and it wasn't really just about water. Because it happened to be water, it happened to be a failure of the drinking water system, but it was a consequence of the fact that there was no accountability to anyone for the decisions that were being made on our behalf, which is fundamental to democracy. Accountability is fundamental to democracy, representative democracy, where we choose from amongst ourselves people who will make decisions that are intended to be in our best interest. And we also choose to vest in them the right to protect us from choices that could be harmful to us. And the second half of that equation was completely lost in Flint, where what we saw is a set of decisions that if local citizens had to weigh in, I mean, let's just face it, I mean, I'm a Flint kid. The concept of drinking water from the Flint River, if you grew up here, it sounds like the punchline to a really bad joke. It's not a choice that we would have made for ourselves. But because there was no light shining on the decision, there was no transparency to that decision, there was no opportunity for citizens to say, no, wait a minute. Decisions were made that harmed us. And what we're seeing right now with the loss in a more slow motion version, not too slow, but not one moment, the loss of democracy, of democratic norms at the federal level, it comes with consequence. There are choices that are being made that hurt us, that harm us. And the consolidation of power into one person, the history of the world is written such that virtually every dictator, every tyrant, at one point in time, either that person or their predecessor won what was perceived to be a free and fair election and then consolidated authority in their own hands. And we're seeing that right now. The Constitution, I thought, had this sort of self-correcting mechanism in it, because the separation of powers would assume a natural reaction to the consolidation of power in the hands of one of those three branches of government. The Constitution and the people who wrote it expected an out-of-control president, and actually even expected perhaps an out-of-control legislative branch. Although the way that was written, it makes it really hard to get anything done. But what it didn't expect is the complicity of one with the consolidation of power in the hands of the other. So that's just, in terms of what the national environment looks like, that's the diagnosis. I think we get confused nationally about what the prescription looks like to cure that ill. And the reason that I'm taking this long path to making this point is that I have come to the conclusion that the solution starts locally. It starts right here. It starts with communities beginning to recognize that the way you restore these principles is not by going on MSNBC or CNN or Fox and screaming at somebody about it, but actually exercising democracy right at home. Democracy is community. That's what it is. Democracy is community. Sometimes we think we're not really engaged in it because we're not connecting directly with elected political leaders. They're just a part of democracy. They are not the manifestation of democracy. Democracy is all of us working together every single day, supporting the institutions of collective self-governance, but making choices for ourselves. And that really starts not at a city council or school board meeting, that starts in a block club. That starts at the neighborhood level, where we begin to develop the muscles to talk to one another, the muscle memory to be able to disagree with one another in a way that doesn't cancel the person with whom I have disagreement, but actually allows us to celebrate the fact that we ought to live in a society that encourages disagreement. I used to talk to the 8th graders when they came to Washington, and it was always 8th graders. And I remember I'd go to the steps of the Capitol when the buses arrived, and I would always challenge them to, what's wrong with Congress? What's wrong with this place? And virtually every time it was that people seem to always be at odds, yelling at one another, screaming at one another. That's not necessarily the problem. As a matter of fact, the way our government was designed was to try to find as many people who thought differently as possible and get them under one dome. But with one thing, with a commitment to sit at a table of goodwill, argue as strongly as you possibly can, sometimes win, sometimes lose, and when you lose, sharpen your pencil, sharpen your argument, organize, and get back to work and try to win the next fight, win the next battle, win the next argument. We have fallen into a place where we think those differences are a weakness. Those differences are our strength. And if we can't model that here locally, how in God's green earth do we expect this national mechanism of democracy to try to do it in that place? One last point, because I know I'm going long. The difference between what happens at that level and what we can do here is the fact that here we can transcend an information ecosystem that is engineered to make us look at one another as the other, as the wrong, as the outrageous, as the ridiculous, as the evil. We don't have the luxury of having that same sense of one another when we go to the same grocery store, or we sit in the same church, or we live on the same street. It's hard to hate up close. We gotta figure out how, but as we are criticizing our national government and trying to correct for it, to realize that the building blocks of democracy are and always have been at the most local level. And so, lastly, again, why do I say all that? Because what we want to do, and the work that many of us are doing already, but I'm speaking specifically about this new set of work that we're launching at the Community Foundation, is to build the capacity, the skills. It takes skill to exercise leadership. It takes knowledge to do it effectively, to locate people who are already engaged, who are already participating, and try to find ways to increase not just the quality of public leadership, of citizen leadership, but the quantity as well. We can't let reality that maybe we're not happy with the quality of people holding formal leadership roles. We have to acknowledge a weakness there. We have to be honest with ourselves. We need to do better, folks. But we can't fix that by hoping for it or planning on good luck or maybe recruiting one really good candidate. We need to build a much bigger and deeper bench of people who see themselves as being engaged, who have the skills to effectively lead, and who maybe have the idea that someday they would find themselves in a public, formal role of leadership. Increasing the number of people in that space and the quality of their ability to lead, well, I believe, is the natural way to create better formal public leaders in those positions of authority. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So this kind of makes me think about how do we create the kinds of frameworks that allow individuals to engage in these ways, to come together, to enact the kind of democratic muscle memory that you just spoke about. I want to ask Professor Bednar one more thing and then maybe have our panelists respond. You have written about the concept of human flourishing and how we might shift policies and institutions to generate these governing frameworks that center our connection and care of one another. How do you see the kinds of local initiatives that we've been discussing today as contributing to such a politics? And can communities like Flint intentionally develop organizations or forms of reciprocity between people that shift the political culture in that direction?
Yeah, 100%. And I've already been hearing an awful lot just from the last panel and an awful lot from my fellow panelists up here, where we're all sort of thinking the same way. So this essay that you're referring to, I wrote because I was really worried about what a growing economy was doing to us as a society, and what public policy, how it was even affecting our public policy. So economy, I'm a little bit agnostic on, well, I'm pro-capitalism, I suppose. I mean, it's like really nice to have such lovely food and et cetera, right? But if the economy, famously doesn't think about society, right? That we are transactional. The way we relate to one another is through a purchasing decision. And I worried that public policy might, and is starting to treat us that way, as individual atomized citizens, numbers, who either have needs or have resources, but it's like an exchange, right? And I worried about, first, what that was doing to our social health. So when you said human flourishing, I stick a word in between those two words. It's human social flourishing. So well-being, amazing, super, super important about the individual. I'm really worried about our community health, about us as a community. The civic health that Representative Kildee describes. And is our public policy contributing to that, building that, or is it unintentionally striking it down? And so one of the things, maybe just quickly to think about what this might look like, this building up of relationships. Somebody earlier said democracy is relational, 100%. So these relationships, maybe think about 4 pillars so we can have some words to use. 1, dignity. This is the way we define a relationship with another person, person to person. The quality of that relationship, the respect that's there. 2, community. What happens in groups, and do we feel a part of that community? Is the community healthy? 3, sustainability. What is our relationship to these, this blessing, God's blessing of our planet, of our resources? What is our relationship to the environment? And then 4th, beauty. And beauty is a word I think of as capturing a whole lot of what brings wonder to our world and what inspires us, what causes us to like stand and gape with our mouths open sometimes, or to be proud of something, or to work really hard for something. All of that is caught up in beauty. We don't all have the same sense of what is beautiful, and that's also part of pluralism, and what makes beauty beautiful is that we have different ideas of it. Okay, if we can have public policy that helps to promote that, this isn't and the Congressman and I were talking beforehand a little bit about investment funds and an ROI approach to it. This is quite different, right? This is like thinking about, can we as a community, through our government, invest in making us, the us of us, more healthy? Okay, why would that be really important for democracy? Democracy, as many of you in the room have been saying, is relational, depends on us. So all that Congressman Kildee was just talking about I love our Constitution. I love how brief it is. I'm a huge admirer of our institutions, but it is not self-correcting, although we did grow up thinking it was. It depends crucially on us. And here when I use us, I mean, again, that us that I was just describing, because it depends on democratic norms. Democratic norms are things like, we have expectations, hello, and I'm so glad I want to talk with you about Citizen University and this, Eric Liu, and all this, the idea of building up civic capacity, building up a sense of empowerment, a sense of agency. It's not just choosing the right person to vote for on the ballot. That's not agency, but it's literally what those amazing panelists before me were talking about with, we work together. We work together to make decisions. including enforcing the expectations we have for those public officials, right? So saying, we believe in the rule of law, we believe in accountability, we believe that if you violate the law, no person is above the law, and we're going to hold you accountable to that. But that depends on us, and in order for us to rise to that challenge, not only do we need to believe that it's our responsibility, and so many of us work with youth, and we know that they're just like waiting, sometimes waiting for our family members, waiting for someone to come and solve the problem. I'm sorry, it's us, right? So first, you have to accept your responsibility. But second, you need to be able to depend on others. It's not just on you, right? It's on everybody. And so we need this sense of confidence that rises above partisanship, that puts democracy well above it, so that across difference, we can come to, because we respect and value one another, we can defend democracy and preserve our freedom. So I'm really grateful for the question. And these are incredible panelists to be able to be thinking a little bit about this shift in, that democracy really does require us. And so how do we build that?
You want that, kid? Hey, look, I always offer to others before I eat. My sister used to tell me, there are some people in the world who will love you no matter what you do. There are other people in the world who won't love you no matter what you do. Always go where love is. If we really begin to think about what makes Flint, Flint, what makes community, community, it's because you figured out how to go to where love is. It's almost it's a place, it's a safe place. I know some people don't like North Flint, but I'm gonna be honest, I feel safer in North Flint than I do in some other places because I know what I'm up against while I'm there. And the places that others don't feel comfortable is a comfortability for other folks. Why is that? It's because when people have some similar backgrounds or a similar concern, you can do the things that need to be done. I'm here to let you know how do we begin to do this? How do we begin to frame this? I love the idea of relationship, but relationship has to be built on something. And for me, it's always built on honesty. It's built on truth telling. Again, it is built on this idea that I can be dead wrong, but you still gonna let me eat with you. What we have a tendency of doing is we wanna cast somebody off to the side because they didn't do it the way we would do it, or maybe they've done it wrong. And my thing is that how do we stay together no matter what? So I learned something watching politics. While everybody else was watching The Wonderful World of Disney, I was watching 60 Minutes. And I realized something that they were doing. They would get on TV and argue, and you would swear they hate each other guts. But then all of a sudden, one of them a Democrat will be doing a Republican's eulogy. And I'm like, hold on, something is wrong here. How is it that they get on here and they say they hate them and they're the worst thing ever created, but yet you're doing my eulogy, you at my kid's bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, you're at my kid's wedding. Oh, they're not telling us about this stuff, they're actually friends. But they want us to argue amongst each other. Well, I'm through arguing with people. If you want to vote Republican, vote red, vote elephant all day long. If you want to vote Democrat, vote the donkey. All I care about is how we gonna make our community better. How can we do that together? We may not agree on a lot of things, but it's something we can agree on. So I am through allowing other people to move my emotions around who really don't care about me. And it is my hope that that's what we begin to build, the muscle. My grandmama said these words, on them hern. Now, some of y'all know exactly what I said. For others, I will say it slower. All of them are hers. She didn't care what you did. She was gonna love you. She was gonna make sure you was all right, and she was gonna believe the best for you. That's how I feel about Flint. That's how I feel about this room. That's how I feel about UM-Flint. That's how I feel about this state and this country. That sooner or later we gonna get it right, y'all, because I'm gonna say this and get this mic back to this man. I refuse to die without seeing the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. I'm gonna see some good on this side. Even though that Constitution wasn't wrote with me in mind, I'ma use it for what I need to use it for right now. It's gonna, how did they say it? It's gonna do right by me.
I think we covered it. Next question.
We might have a little extra time, perhaps. I was going to go to the last.
I'll take care of
that. Okay, so this question is for everyone. What initiatives or cultural changes in our society or in our city give you hope for the future? Where should local or grassroots efforts focus to create new ways of doing democracy and to build a stronger democratic culture?
I think, I'll start with the reason for hope, because I think we need to be honest that there are fewer reasons for hope than we would like there to be. Our politics in this country are broken, not permanently broken. It's solvable, but it's not good. We ought to just start with that premise. It's not good. And we also have to acknowledge that our ability to make local decisions has been compromised as well. And we need to do better. But there are these occasional moments where the voices of the people prevail. And I don't want to just continue to go back to the same example, but I'm going to. The Flint water crisis could have been unnoticed. It could have been left to be. And the results would have been far more dire, especially for those kids who were impacted. But how did that change? And look, I was part of the political infrastructure at that time, and I was hearing these voices of people, getting frustrated that some of them weren't being validated. But their persistence, their organization, their self-education on the issue, and their persistence led to a moment where suddenly they went from being this sort of fringe element screaming in the dark to suddenly being the voice of the people that had to be heard, and they were. To the degree that they should have been? No, not quite. But let's just remind ourselves that it could have been entirely possible that that moment back in 2015, 2016 could have kind of come and gone, and we would have just been a little bit less, a little bit sadder. The kids would have a little bleaker future. And we never would have been on the cover of Time magazine, the New York Times, or any other newspaper. We never would have had our story told. Citizens did that. Not the formal leaders, but the people made that happen. That, to me, gives me hope that when push comes to shove, backs against the wall, all is at stake. There is a way to prevail. And so what I hope we can do is figure out how do we bottle that moment and use it to tackle some of these other issues that may be less celebrated but are equally as important. We got to figure that out. We got to be able to do that. I want to get back to this thing that Patrick said, because it's really important. The overarching principle of love, of understanding we have this obligation to one another. I think about one of my champions in my life of the principles of democracy is the late Congressman John Lewis, who became a good friend of mine. John was completely unafraid to use the language of love. He always returned to love. He loved his community, the beloved community. He loved the people he worked with. He loved the people he disagreed with. He loved the man who, in southern Mississippi once, nearly beat him to death. You know, that to me if we can't acknowledge this basic human concept of connection to one another and humanity of one another, dignity of one another, which is recognize a person's dignity as an expression of love. If we can't start with that, all this other stuff is just technical. We have to just get back to this notion that we respect and love one another and stop treating people who look, sound, talk, think differently than us as if they are somehow lesser than us. If we can't get that right, we're never going to succeed. The people in Flint got that right back in that moment when it really, really needed us to get it right. And while it wasn't a perfect solution, the outcome was a whole lot better than it would have been if it would have just sort of silently faded away.
So we have, Patrick mentioned love. Dan mentioned hope. So if I was just representing me as the Flint kid growing up as a Baptist boy, there'd be another word I'd add, which is faith, for faith, love, and hope. But as a representative of the foundation, let me submit the word civility. Civility in general, it's not left, it's not right. I think you said you can vote blue, you can vote red, or anything, any other choice that you'd like to make. Civility is really more, it's not ward versus ward or district versus district, right? It is really, or it shouldn't be. Let me put it, it should not be. Civility in general is about serving communities locally, really to innovate towards the common good, going back to that idea about the collective action. And so I know that's where we try to focus our efforts at the foundation. How do we be a good partner or convener in this civic engagement and the local ecosystem related to civic engagement? How can we help promote civility so when we do encounter folks who look different, speak different, are different than us, that we are prepared for that encounter? A couple of things that I'd raise as if I was Patrick, I'd say as I take my seat. A couple of things that I'll raise right before I take my seat is as it relates to the future, Jacob, what you asked. So I mentioned at the top that there are things that the national landscape could learn from Flint. I do think as we talk about partnerships, it's really important that there are things that Flint can learn from others and from other communities. While we do some things very well, and there were these inflection points, whether it was the water crises or some of the other crises and epidemics that we have faced, we can still learn from other communities. One thing that we could learn from is if we think just back to a couple days ago in these elections that happened on Tuesday, and there were definitely some hot spots for places where people were watching. Many of these races, they emphasize young men, ages 18 to 29. So when we talk about Civic University and those things and the work that North Flint NAC is doing and others in the community are doing, we know there are other groups and coalitions focused on this, but this demographic, we have to be sure that we include them in the conversation, that we continuously engage this group and find ways to engage this group, or really seek, why they are not engaged. Although oftentimes there is really good reason. But then how can you really then have conversations and break down walls and barriers and kind of affect change in that way? Another thing that I'd say is real journalism. So I think that real journalism really gives us an opportunity to interrogate ideas. And I think that's a really important part of the process. And so there was a panel of local journalists earlier in this symposium. That's another point that I'd elevate as we talk about going into the future and things that I think that we could see. And lastly, we may have to at times, adjust our words. DEI may not be the flavor of the month. As a history of my own people, that we have seen Negro and the harsher form of Negro to Black, to African American, to terminology may change, but we can stay committed to the work and the outcomes, regardless of if we have to and when we have to pivot what it is that we say and how we say it. The symposium is cracks in the pavement, and I'd return to what we heard at the opening as well. Are we really looking to fill those cracks? How would we fill those cracks? Or are we looking to do a little bit heavier work and maybe bust open that foundation a little bit more and actually rebuild the foundation underneath? It's the commitment of time, talent, and treasure that really builds responsibility, that creative problem solving, and really ultimately builds a stronger community. I think that's where we'd rest.
Because the pastor's going to close us out, so let me say a little bit first.
Go ahead.
And then it's all you.
All right.
I thank you for raising journalism, because that's where I was going to go, and I'm going to say a little bit more. But so a couple things that give me hope. We've been talking about, you've heard the word muscle a lot, and democratic norms. One thing we think about with democratic norms is, just like with our muscles, that they get stronger when you use them. They get stronger when they're tested. I think we're at a moment where our democratic norms are being tested. And weirdly, that's good. I think that that's good because it's causing us all to recognize how important they are and that we're needed. And when I give talks, this is related, but another point, I am so delighted that when I say things, or others on this panel have said the same thing, that it's democracy before partisanship, above partisanship. It doesn't matter how you vote, what animal you vote for, right?
Come on.
It's that we all care about democracy. And that when we say that people in the room are nodding. So just about, it was right after the Kirk killing. I went out to Utah. And at the invitation of the Utah State Legislature and the governor, Spencer Cox, and he's really worried about polarization. And they had delegates from 15 different state legislatures, but it was almost entirely Republicans in the room, almost entirely. And I was talking about democracy above partisanship, and if we make this about partisanship, we're going to lose democracy. We're going to lose it. On word choice, amazing guy from Wyoming, leather skin boots, they were really sharp, says, I love everything you said. Love everything you said except when you use that D word. And I'm like, it wasn't a DEI talk. I can do that, right? But maybe I said diversity. And he's like, democracy. It's a republic. Okay, all right. So I'm like, this is an invitation to sit with this man at lunch. So that's what I did. And I talked a little bit about when you hear the word democracy, what do you hear? And he hears out of control mob. He hears, at best, uninformed, the uninformed. And so for him, he really wants representative democracy. I said, we're in agreement here, right? We're talking about representative democracy, but the people need to be engaged. And so one last piece of this, when we were talking about democratic backsliding, and the other part of that in the United States, what we're really worried about is the nationalization of local politics, where the language locally is just, re-expressing what we're hearing in Washington, which causes us to ignore our local issues, right? And definitely causes us to not be able to work together. Places where that is not happening are places where civic associations are strong, and you all are rocking it, and places where there is a thriving free press, local journalism. Super, super important. report just came out 2 weeks ago from Northwestern's journalism school. 50 million people in this country are living in news deserts, meaning that they don't have reliable access to credible local journalism. Without the local journalism, we don't know what's going on. We're not informed about what our community is doing and what our community needs are and how we can get involved, right? We don't have the local watchdog who's, for accountability. And we don't have the kind of viewpoint diversity that can be expressed in a really good local paper where you see, wait, even in my own community, there are people who think differently than me, and that's actually okay. Democracy needs diversity, even locally. And so learning who people are so you can reach out a hand and say, let's find the common ground and work together. So thank you, Ken, for bringing up the local journalism, because I can't say enough how important that is. Thank you all for all that you're doing.
So I've been in this room, I don't know how many hours, and I ain't said a particular set of names. And I'm finna say these names because they can hear me all the way in North Flint. So I'm finna say Miss Jerry, Miss Jeanette, Miss Catherine, Miss Green, Miss Daisy, Mr. Phil, LaQuindra, Terrence, Miss Vivian, Sharon, and Suzanne. And that's just a few of the people who are out there really just doing the work. What do we need? We need trusted voices. Some of us don't have them. Other people do. Use the trusted voices in your community to be the ones who become the messengers. Oh yeah, and I wrote this thing called the Community Bill of Rights. I'm not one of these people who say use these people for free. You will pay her because of her excellence. Pay Miss Jerry and Miss Jeanette for their excellence as well. They lived experience is just as valuable as a PhD. All right, next thing, programs that could work, like RX Kids, which uses universalism as a way to get resources to people, which I don't mind, but I am gonna push back a little bit because I'm a believer in targeted universalism, which means what is the goal we trying to set for our community? Let's say education. We want everybody reading at a third grade reading level by the time they end, like the third grade. So why don't we put the resources where they need to be to get everybody there versus looking at who getting the resources? Because if the goal is to have an educated electorate, we need some educated kids. I'm sorry, I don't care what color you are. If you can't read, you can't read. You need to learn how to read. K to 3, learn how to read. 3 to forever, read to learn. So it's too important for us not to do it, right? This is a challenge for everybody. Listen, democracy, demos, the people. Kratos, rule. People rule. If you ain't ruling or helping, what are you doing? We need everybody in this room to get up and do more. I know you may not think you have a lot to give, but trust me, there is something inside of you that our community, that our state and our country need. So please don't be afraid to use what you got so we can get what we want. And then finally, I'm gonna leave you with this quote from author Zadie Smith. She simply says this: the past is always tense, but the future perfect.
Oh.
I don't have much to follow. I will just say thank you so much to all of these panelists. And I also want to thank everyone.
Yes.
Colleagues and community members, this is something we didn't talk about much, but this is actually a kickoff symposium, and the idea is that faculty will be creating courses that include these kinds of themes and have the resources to work with community members, and so we hope to foster some of those connections today and see them bear fruit over the next few years. Thanks for being here for the last 10 hours, and have a great day.